Okay, now we're going to take a look at the TREX470LM Tail. See if I can get this in frame here properly. This is how it comes assembled from the factory. All the bolts will be loose, but it will be assembled. This has been on and off this helicopter a few times, so you might see some thread locker here. Try to establish the easiest way for you to go through this whole sequence. I've done this a number of times. For tools, you're going to need a JIS Phillips, Japanese Industrial Standard, the smaller one. You're going to need a 1.3 millimeter, and you're going to need a 1.5 millimeter driver. Now, sequence-wise, you can come up with your own, but the goal is to be able to thread lock everything you have to. Get the other JIS blade grip screw out. What I've found to be the easiest sequence so far is I'm going to take the inner side of the pitch change mechanism. This bolt is going to come out. This is a stainless bolt with a shoulder. If I can actually zoom in on that. This particular one uses that shoulder bolt. Flip this around. Going to do the same thing on this side. And these I'm just going to set off to the side for now. While the head is still installed, while the actual tail rotor head is still installed, easiest at this time to take out the bolts and do your lubrication and thread locking. I'm going to disassemble one of these grips and show it to you. Take out the spindle bolt itself. It has a washer just like a main rotor head. I'm going to slide this off. Inside, if we were to actually take this apart, you've got, see if we can tighten up on this a little bit. You have the rear radial bearing here. There is an inside radial bearing. I'm going to push the bearing stack out from the inside so you can get a better look at this. Okay, what we have here I have the outer radial bearing. I have a tiny washer. Let me actually pan my camera over a little bit. Sorry about that. We've got the outer radial. We have got a washer that spaces between the outer radial. And if you look closely, you can see this marked out. And then I've got the actual thrust bearing right here. And the assembly sequence is, and if I were to look inside the grip, see if I can do this, the inner race of the thrust bearing is visible in here. So the open face of this bearing, the obverse face of the thrust bearing is going to go inside this tail grip, followed by the thrust bearing outer race marked out. So out goes toward the outer side, pretty straightforward there. That goes back together. Slide that in, followed by spacer washer and the outer bearing. I'm going to actually grab the outer bearing and the spacer washer together, and I'm going to slide these back together. Push all this back down inside the grip. That's here. This one's going to go back over. And I'm going to reassemble using tail grip spindle bolt with a washer on it, bit of thread lock, and this will all come back together nice and smooth. Okay, now if you notice, I do have some brass collars inside the tail grip. We don't want to lose these. The reason I took it apart this way, and we're actually going to have to do both sides of the grip to get it right. Right now I want to take this tail grip off and move on to a next step. You're obviously going to finish all of the pieces here, not just one side. I'm doing this just for brevity in the video. Slide that off. Now what we're going to want to do in sequence here, the easiest is to thread lock the slider while it's here. This comes pretty well locked from the factory. I've built 2 of these 470LM so far, and this piece was locked pretty well. However, if you ever reassemble this tail, it's good to know how this goes together. There is a flat spot on the actual slider itself. You can grab that with a small pair of needle nose, and then you're going to unthread the slider pitch arm here most of the way out. Okay, I can do that, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of thread lock on my 1.3 millimeter driver here and just come in here and swipe that on the threads, and I'm going to tighten this back down. This is not a 700, so you don't have to put a whole lot of stress on here. We just get this finger tight. At this point, you should slide and make sure that the pitch change mechanism works nice and smooth, which it does. Otherwise, you may have actually over tightened this. Most of the time when I've seen a tail not work well, it's because the tail slider in this and this grip change arm here were over tightened. Moving forward, while I still have this back end section off because it's easier, you've got a sequence of bolts here, some 1.3 and some 1.5. There's a pair of 1.3 millimeter that actually attach to the slider itself. I pull those out, do a little bit of thread lock there, repeat. Next to here on the articulated hinge mechanism here, there's a pair of 1.3 headed bolts. Do the same thing. Those come out. Replace each one as I go through. Now, I've moved the tail pitch slider out of the way, or the articulated arm here a little bit. These are 1.5 millimeter. I'm going to pull these out from both sides. One on this side, one back here. I want to have this out because I want to take this arm out of the way. Once this is out, I'm going to take these two bolts out, which are only easy to get at, and we're going to thread lock this inner side of the tail case carefully. Repeat here. We can bring the tail slider back on. The way I'm holding this right now, orientation wise, I'm going to want the pitch change arm to be on top. Everything should line up. If this piece of the hinge does not line up with the mounting boss, you've probably got this whole thing sitting upside down. Okay, that piece is back together. So now I have my tail slider, which moves nice and smooth, back together. I can bring the tail grip back on. I'm going to show you here. There is a machined out slot here for the grub screw to sit in. Assembly sequence, make sure I've got the Align logo facing out. Get the grip arm out of the way. Rotate it around till I can see the slot for the grub screw. And we just have to get this close. And then you can work your way around till you feel the grub screw will actually seat down in the slot. And pretty easy to put together. Once we've got this, we can easily reassemble. I said I've got the little brass collar in here. The two short shoulder screws with a Phillips. Okay, we also have to take the other end of the pitch change arms out. These also use a brass collar. And reassemble here into the arms themselves. We're going to repeat for the other side, and that's about it. So, important things to look at here. The far side, we're not going to thread lock the far side of the tail case yet. This will be used when we put the tail belt on later. You're going to have to do both grips. You're going to have to thread lock the grip to the pitch change arm here. Same thing here on the outer parts of this yoke. You're going to want to thread lock the threaded collar that comes through into the yoke. You've got two 1.3 millimeter socket heads here that are going to use that attach to the slider itself. Two more here. You want the 1.5s to take the articulated hinge apart, and you're going to have to get at the inner side of the tail case here to put that together. All in all, this is pretty much identical to a TREX 500, 550, 600, 700, just a whole lot smaller. We'll deal with the belt drive on this later when we actually assemble the tail.